Hey everybody, my name is Laura and I wanted to chat a little bit today about my thoughts and reflections from working in and around DC for the past few years. This is something that I had really worked toward for quite a while and would have liked to see more resources and thoughts and opinions on what it was actually like to live and work in the city. So in this video, I'm gonna focus on the working side, and then if you guys wanna hear more about my experience living in Washington, DC, let me know and I can make a video about that in the future. But I think this is just a good opportunity for kind of a chatty reflection on what is fantastic about working in Washington, DC, and what is maybe the not so fantastic side of the district. So before I kind of dive into the pros and cons, I wanted to just quickly bring you up to speed on who I am and how I ended up working in DC. So I am originally from St. Louis, but then I spent 10 years living in England and going to school, working through my degrees in history in Liverpool in Northwest England. I thought that I was going to pursue I suppose like an academically focused career. I really wanted to be a history professor, started my history PhD in 2014. And then in the next couple of years, when things got a little bit politically turbulent, really kind of recognized that I wanted to go into the government and politics and policy side. So still finished my doctorate, but then came home, and the first thing I did was work on a few different political campaigns. And that was great because I was able to really learn more about what happens in these grassroots campaigns and how things kind of operate on that ground level and at the community level. So I moved around doing that for a couple of years, but I knew the whole time that what I really wanted to do ultimately was move to Washington, DC. For me, that was just the centerpiece of all things government and career opportunity, but it was really tough to break into it. I knew that it was where I wanted to be, and I will say, as an Army brat, as a kid, and then living abroad for 10 years, and then coming back and working on political campaigns and bouncing around there, the thought of staying in one place too long actually gives me really bad anxiety. I'm not sure if anybody watching can relate to that. But DC has kind of always been the one exception, and I can get into that into this video. But it was not easy. The whole time I was working on campaigns, I'm gonna just kind of expose myself here. I sent out hundreds of resumes to like any job in DC I would have taken just to get into DC. And it took a while, and I'm kind of glad now that it worked out the way that it did, because I was able to come in when I got the perfect opportunity at the perfect job. But it was very disparaging for quite a while. So I'm saying that just to say that if you are somebody who can relate to that and who maybe is going through that now, you are not alone. There's nothing wrong with you, and just keep persisting and it will all work out absolutely fine. So I was working on a campaign in Pittsburgh when I then got my job opportunity to move to Washington, DC. I was so excited. It was actually after all of those, I can't even say rejections, because it was really just ghosting from hundreds of resumes. I couldn't believe that then I was able to get a job opportunity at what I considered a really dream employer situation, and that was working at one of the embassies in DC. So I couldn't wait to move in, and then worked there for the next few years. until very recently when I took a job just outside of DC. I wanted to learn a little bit more about how politics and government happens at the state and local level. So that is what I'm doing now, and I very much expect to return to the hustle and bustle of DC in the near future, and that is, I'm sure, where I will build and spend the rest of my career. So I wanted to kind of touch on a few pros and cons and some reflections that I've gathered from working in and around DC. And I would really be interested in hearing from you in the comments of what you think, because this is very much just a few years of experience. It will be interesting to continue to evolve on with these thoughts and to continue to reflect as the years go on. But here are some thoughts I have just a few years into working in Washington, D.C. So I will start with the good. The first thing that I really love about DC is that a lot of the people that you will meet are very intelligent and ambitious and driven. Disclaimer, that is not everybody. I'm sure you will meet plenty of people who you have a lot of thoughts about, but I think you would also notice that you will largely meet a lot of people who are just very bright and very eager and very driven. And I find that to be very energizing. I found that to be very motivating for wanting to then be the best version of myself in my career. And there's definitely kind of a tougher side to that I'll get to in the con section. But I really enjoyed just being in a city that is full of a bunch of go-getters, and I think that is something that you will enjoy as well. The second pro about DC is that it is truly a global city. Because of the embassy community, there are people here from almost every country in the world, and that really reflects in everyday life and in the food and in the culture, and you really feel that global diversity in a way that I hadn't really felt before. And so if that is something that interests you, just living within this very global community all in one city and getting to learn about all these different cultures, then that's something about DC that I think will be a huge positive for you. The next positive to note is that coming from a situation where every time I got a new campaign job, I had to often move states. And in DC, something that drew me here is that you can be as ambitious as you want. You can go after any job opportunity that appeals to you. And very frequently, you can do all this without having to move house every time that you pursue one of those new job opportunities. And that's a really big deal, because essentially you don't have to limit your ambition and you don't have to limit your job search if you are interested in the government side of jobs. And I really liked the idea of being able to, for once in my life, kind of settle down from a residential standpoint, but to be able to still pursue any ambitions that I had on the career side. Finally, I love that this is a company town. If you are like me and you are a huge politics, policy, government nerd, then you will share my just nerdy excitement about being in DC, because all of a sudden everybody is interested in the same types of things that you're interested in, and everybody is constantly talking about politics and what's going on. It's very exciting, and you see the motorcades all the time, and you spot senators or whatever it is, but it just very much feels political. And if that is something that you are interested in and feel like maybe that's something that's made you stand out in the past, because wherever you're from, maybe people were not as excited about it, then I think you will definitely find that community in DC and feel like you have found your people. So with all of that, I have to include some things that are more negatives, definitely subjective negatives, but things that I wish that I would have known maybe before I moved here, or things that I think haven't been quite as enjoyable about my time when I worked in DC. So the first one is kind of the flip side to the coin to all of those intelligent and driven people that we were talking about. So the flip side to that is that essentially you have a city full of type A people, super ambitious, super driven people from all over the country, and that can create kind of a very work-centric, maybe kind of the toxic productivity, poor work-life balance culture. And there can be kind of an over association of your identity with what it is that you do for work. 10 times out of 10, when you meet somebody, the first thing they'll ask you is what you do or who you work for. And that's definitely something to bear in mind, because I think the natural boundaries and kind of healthy lines of work-life balance are not naturally baked in to the work culture here. So that's something that you need to make sure that you are being vigilant of and providing yourself to make sure that you're still getting those. It also kind of comes with the territory that it's a very professionally competitive city, and that can be a little bit exhausting. It also becomes very reliant on the network that you build, and I hate to sound cliche, but a lot of times it is about who you know. But the good news about that is, even if you come into the city and you don't know a soul, you can build up a really good network that is personal and professional. And so you can kind of be strategic about that. People are very open to going and getting a coffee. If you reach out and say, hey, you're doing the kind of work that I would really like to do. Do you mind if we just talk on the phone for 15 minutes or grab a quick coffee and I can pick your brain a little bit? So you can build that network, but it does tend to be, there is more of an emphasis on who you know and what sort of network you build and who you work for. And there is kind of a hyper competitiveness and that poor work-life balance that you have to think about. All those, though, are things I genuinely feel you can safeguard against, and you can try to ensure that you are as disconnected from it as possible, because DC can definitely be a little bit of a bubble, and I think kind of sometimes doesn't feel familiar to people like me who are from the Midwest, and I don't really see that normal culture reflected here. So I do then find it your kind of personal responsibility to retain those values from where you come from, and to ensure that you're living in a way and working in a way that feels very comfortable and authentic to you. The one other thing that I wanted to talk about before ending the video is a big takeaway for myself, and maybe nobody can relate to this because maybe everybody kind of comes into DC and knows exactly what it is that you want to do. But I want to include this just in case anybody can relate. But essentially, before I got to DC, it was such a, it was fine to just have the broad goal of getting to DC. I knew that I wanted to work somewhere in this ecosystem of government and politics, and that was enough of a northern star to get me through all those applications that got ignored and to then get me my job. But what I found is then when you break into the ecosystem, because if you're like me, you're kind of happy to take whatever if it's in that world, And then when it's time to get your next position and to kind of finesse the path that you want to take, that's when you have to really do some thinking about what lane you want to take. Because once you're in DC and you're working in that ecosystem, it's not enough to just say, I want to work in government, or I want to work in policy, or I want to work in politics. There are so many different lanes once you really get into it. And for me, it was a little bit intimidating because it felt as if everybody else had already chosen their lane and committed to it. And I can do a separate video on this, but really had to do some soul searching on what lane I actually wanted to go down, and did I want to work more on the policy side or more on the political strategy side. There's comms and there's research and there's international relations and there's domestic policy, and even if you're like, okay, I want to work in policy, okay, then do you want to be a generalist or do you want to be a specialist? And if you want to be a specialist, what do you want to specialize in? So if you come in with this really specific view of what you want to do, then this won't be a problem for you. But if you are somebody who knows that you want to work in this world but doesn't know quite how, and you just are happy to take anything to get you into the DC landscape, at some point then you're going to have to do a lot of thinking about what it is exactly that you want to do, and almost more importantly, what it is exactly that you don't want to do. Because for me, actually, the most progress I made in this soul search was in crossing out a lot of things that I realized, okay, well, I definitely don't want to do that. And so kind of narrowing it down based on taking those negatives out of my list was the most constructive path. But again, that is something I can discuss in a later video if anybody is interested. But I know that's not really quite a pro or a con, but just a general reflection on working in DC that I wanted to share, just in case it resonates with anybody, and if anybody kind of can feel a little bit less alone, knowing that 100% there are other people going through the same thing and the same kind of professional identity crisis, kind of like a dog that catches the car and you're in DC and you did it, but now what? So more on that later, but please subscribe so you can see more of my thoughts on Washington, DC life and working and international study and general kind of life lessons in my mid-30s. But please also comment down below if you have lived or worked in DC. I'd love to hear if I've missed anything, if you agree or disagree, or if you're somebody who is interested in coming to DC and working here, please share that as well. If there's any questions that I can answer, any ideas that you would like to see addressed in another chatty video, just let me know. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you very soon.